finally got around to
It is good to see everyone here this morning. Glad that you're here at the Park Cities Rotary Club. We have a few new members, and I would like to the new members that are here already to stand if you're present. Anybody new member? Well, nobody is here yet, but there you are. Good deal. We're so glad that you're here. A colorful woman as well. Anyway, let's all stand and greet one another. Be sure to greet Teresa for sure.
They got a lot of church. Only about 300,000. They got about 300,000. So a lot of church.
I'm going to text him and just tell him he hasn't started.
My guy may not be here today. I'm going to see Clement. Clement George is going to announce as a new provisional member, or whatever you call him these days. Clement George, the Cross Bank guy. Very good, very good. How are you?
Yes, sir. I'm glad you guys have had a good time visiting, but we need to get our program going. I want to call on Eric HEITKAMP to come, past President Eric HEITKAMP, to come and lead us in our invocation, our pledge, and national anthem. Eric?
Thank you, President Nolan. Do we have any concerns today that we need to bring to light? Okay, with none, if you bow your heads. Lord, we come to you before you with hearts full of gratitude for the gift of family and friends. Thank you for the bonds through Rotary that unite us, for the love that surrounds us, and for the moments of togetherness that enrich our lives. May we cherish these relationships and nurture them with kindness and understanding. Bless our gatherings and strengthen our ties now and always. Amen. Join me for the pledge and the national anthem.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As we get seated, I want to, first of all, give you the opportunity to tell us something that you're excited about. Happy Bucks is what this is called, and Richard Sanford is going to be coming around. If you have something that you're happy about that you'd like to put a little money in the box for, then raise your hand and let him know.
Got CLEVE. That's right.
Well, I'm happy that Clement George is joining the club today, and I'm equally happy he's a graduate of the University of Texas.
Oh, my, oh, my. Woo, pig, suey. Okay, good deal.
I am just happy for the fact that the election's over. I'm sure that's been said. I'm just happy that that SMU is hopefully going to win the ACC championship. So go Ponies!
All right, good deal. Someone else happy about? Oh, Eric, come on. Oh, first of all,
I'm happy that I got to buy Miss Charlotte's last lunch with us. It was such a pleasure knowing her and having her here all this time that I've been here. Thank you, Miss Charlotte.
amen.
I got a call this morning on the way to breakfast from my oldest son who lives in Connecticut, and he is engaged to be married.
All right, good. That's something to be happy about for sure. Anyone else? Oh, Mark, here we go.
Well, it's kind of a combination sad, happy, but I'm going to echo the about Charlotte. Really appreciate her being my companion with helping with the AV and being a great assistant and a friend since I've been in the club. And we're going to miss you, but I'm glad that you're starting a new part of your life and you're going to be close to family. So Godspeed.
Now,
Okay, I'm going to put some money in. I'm going to put Van Oliver's money in because Van, go get a book. I'm going to put this when we finish right by Laurie. And when you've heard John RAGOSTA and want to get a book, there's only going to be 9 now left after Van. Go get it at the end. If you're willing to make a contribution, please put it in Happy Bucks.
all right, thank you. Now we're going to introduce guests.
Yes.
Okay. Now we'd like to take a moment to introduce any guests. Would anyone like to be introduced? Right. Okay.
I'd like to introduce a good friend of mine, and he's been a guest with us before, and many of you may know him. Real estate mogul, is that fair? Realtor extraordinaire, Duke Jimerson. So he's joining us today. Not joining, but he's visiting. He may join in the future.
Well, we're glad about that. That's for sure. Welcome, Duke.
I'd like to introduce Reese. Reese, I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for having me. My name is Reese Orman. I'm the CEO of NeuroGlow. We're DFW's leading psychedelic medicine clinic. We do ketamine-assisted therapy. So if you know anyone suffering from anxiety, PTSD, bipolar, host of mental health disorders, it's worth exploring. Please come ask me if you have any questions about it. It's been transformative for me and many other people. Work with a lot of veterans and first responders as well. So thank you all for having me.
You bet. Welcome. Richard, right over here.
Hi, I want to introduce my daughter, Petra. She's an 11th grader at Great Hearts in Irving, and she's home today, so I brought her along.
That's great. Welcome. Richard, here we go.
I'd like to introduce Chad Everett, if you please stand. Chad is a precinct chair with me with the Dallas GOP. Chad is a precinct chair. I never found out what you do, Chad.
I'm in real estate, kind of the economic side of it. Yeah.
Well, great.
Welcome.
I would like to introduce, and Nathan has been with us a couple of times before, but I invited him today so he can go ahead and see once again our club, what opportunities we have over here. I'll let you go ahead and say a couple of words what you do.
Thank you so much, Sergio, for inviting me. Had a chance to meet some other wonderful Rotarians that are part of this club. I work with a company called Thrivent Financial as a financial advisor and work with individuals, businesses, and also not-for-profits. And look forward to getting to know some of you after.
Glad to meet you, Nathan.
Thank you. And we,
if no more guests, it's time for a special word.
Well, most of you have heard already that I am leaving this club. Boo. And going to Reno, Nevada, where my brother and sister-in-law live, and I'm going to be staying in their place, taking care of the dog when they're out of town. And I just look back at 20 years with this club. And it's amazing. Everyone, the first year I was lucky enough to go on an international trip to India where we did 2 weeks of, 1 week of service and 1 week of touring, and extraordinary. So if you haven't gone on an exchange or one of these trips with the clubs, whether it's our club or someone else's, it's just an amazing opportunity to get connected with the rest of the world. And so many of you have been kind to me and helped me out when I had questions, and it's just, this is the club. So, you know, they've got good clubs there, but I'll be looking at them, but I'll be comparing them all to you.
Oh, my.
Thank you for your support. Oh, and this is the scarf that I bought in the first trip to India that I had after I joined the club, the district, and so I just thought I'd wear it today.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you so much.
Okay, I'm going to bring this back. I'm going to put the Happy Bucks next to the books for those who want them later.
All right. Thank you, Richard. Herb Sev is going to come and talk to us about Mark Neese. He's our marketplace advertiser for today.
Thank you, President Nolan. Our marketplace advertiser, as he said, is Mark Neese with Sync Lab Media. Mark has been a member of the club for 10 years and is a Paul Harris Fellow. He will continue to serve on the board as the Director of Public Image, as well as the District 5810 Public Image Team Leader. In today's marketplace, every business and professional should be marketing their brand with high-quality video content. Let's watch Mark's video.
I'm Mark Neese, co-founder and CEO of Sync Lab Media, a video marketing and consulting firm in Addison, Texas. We create video marketing strategies and content so that businesses can increase awareness, engagement, and revenue. At Sync Lab Media, we work well with growth-minded executives across industries who understand that investment in quality video marketing assets is a smart business strategy in today's highly competitive digital world. Great referral partners are business services executives, digital marketing agencies, PR and advertising firms, and SEO website development companies. As a Scouter and Rotarian, I am committed to building business relationships through trust, fairness, and solutions that benefit all stakeholders. So let's connect and let me know how I can help you.
Help me thank Mark for his sponsorship.
Next, I'd like to call on Cleve Clinton to come up and introduce, for the introduction of a new member, Clement George. Clement, come on up as well.
Clement George is a commercial banker at Frost Bank in Dallas, helps businesses with banking and lending needs, formerly with J.P. Morgan Private Bank, where he worked with ultra-high net worth individuals and families. And I need to find out more about this. He also served as a surface warfare officer in the U.S. Navy, which that's kind of cool. Somebody else around here might know more about that, Cub. In terms of education, he's got an MBA from SMU, so Jeff will be happy to hear that. And as I mentioned earlier, he graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree from University of Texas. He grew up in the Park Cities along with my daughter. We spent some time with Philip Bankhead in little confirmation efforts. He graduated Highland Park High School. He and his wife Molly have two daughters who go to Boone Elementary and day school at Highland Park United Methodist Church. Clement George is going to be a great addition. I hope everybody will stop by and introduce yourselves and then repeat your name often, as he has more people to learn their names than you've got to learn his. I hope you will call him Clement George.
Well, first of all, Clement, we want to welcome you, but this is the packet of information that you need to memorize before next week.
Oh, wow.
A lot of fine print there, but that's all that you need to know about this club, Rotary International, and there's your badge, your red badge that you have. But if you check off the list that's in here of things that you need to do, you'll get a blue badge like this one with your name on it. It's instead as a full-fledged, fully affiliated with this club. So we're so grateful for your membership and glad to welcome you to Park Cities Rotary.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
We're going to take it. We're supposed to have a picture made at this point. Oh, there's John. You already took it.
Oh,
well,
here we go.
We
Look,
got to
wait,
do one.
this
This
is
is a better one. We're staging this whole thing.
There we go. Good.
Thank
There
you.
you go.
There you go.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, John.
All right, with that said, Eric Harrison, would you come up and talk to us about the November-December shoe drive that we've been discussing? Eric?
Thank you, President Nolan. If you were here last month when our guest from Souls for Souls was here, she talked about a number of programs that they have, one of which is the For Opportunity program. And what they do is they take used shoes and they send them overseas to developing countries, and they educate and train people to become entrepreneurial by selling shoes and making an impact around the world. So I am going to be, starting next Friday, collecting any shoes, any used shoes sneakers, flip-flops, heels, men, women, children. They can use anything. Even if you've got that one shoe that's sitting in your closet that you can't find, that they can use it, okay? So bring shoes, because not only, and let me just share a couple of statistics, in 2022, entrepreneurs increased their household income by 233%, and 92% either purchased a home or saved towards home ownership. And not only did it make an impact on income, 87% improved the quality of education and regular attendance for their children. 80% assumed at least one community leadership role, and 92% improved family health and nutrition. So that sounds a whole lot like a lot of the same initiatives we support. Please bring your shoes. I'll be collecting. I know we're going to be bouncing around over the next few weeks. I'll even make a house call. And by the way, you can collect shoes at work and bring them up here. You can collect them, you know, civic, other. We'll take everything. We're trying to collect as many pair of shoes over the next few weeks as we can. So bring them on. Thanks.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you. I have several announcements I'd like to run through real quickly. Scottish Rite popcorn packing is coming up at 8:30 a.m. on the 23rd of this month. And Jeff McNaughton, Steph, stand up. He's the guy that's leading the charge for this event. If you want to sign up, he's the guy that you need to sign up with, or you can go online and do that as well. But we need some more volunteers for that event, so I hope that you'll take that seriously and look into that for sure. On the 29th of this month, we will not be having a meeting here. That's right after Thanksgiving, so if you show up, you'll be by yourself, eating turkey with somebody else. I don't know who. Sunday, the 1st of December, is the tree lighting. The tree lighting at Centennial Park from 3 to 7. It's from 3 to 7. You have gotten some emails about it. It might have said 2 to 7, but it's 3 to 7. And we are participating and volunteering for that event as well. And Tanya has been sending out emails, and be sure to sign up to help with that. And there's a great MC who happens to be sitting right there, whose name is Jeff Brady, is going to be the MC for that event. They couldn't get me, so they got Jeff, is what it amounted to. No, I'm kidding. Then Friday, the 12-13, the 13th of the month. Oh, wait a second. The 6th of December, we're going to have our annual Chili Day at the Salvation Army. So we'll not be meeting here. We'll be meeting at the Salvation Army. And then on the 13th, we'll be meeting at the Dallas Institute, which is, we had a speaker that came from the DISD, and everybody seemed to be very engaged, and so we'll get a tour of that facility where they're teaching students how to get into trades and teaching them in a bunch of different ways so that they can be employed right out of high school and making really good money doing in those employment opportunities. Then Saturday the 14th is the Angel Tree Distribution Day at the Salvation Army. If you'd like to sign up with that, is it Eric HEITKAMP? Are you kind of leading the way with that? It's online, okay. And what we'd be doing is getting those gifts organized and to the right people. Distributing. Gotcha. All right, good deal. Then Friday the 20th, that's going to be a big day, is Tom Rhodes here. Tom is not here today, but he's going to host all of us. Every one of us will be going to the Christmas party at his house. And it will be starting at 6:30 on Friday the 20th of December. So that's going to be a great day. Now, we have a raffle drawing. And so come on up. Okay, Tom, you have the basket, and you're going to ask John here to pick.
One more thing, Clement is our new member, right? Where are you?
So he can do anything.
So the odds of 115, right, out of whatever, and then we've got 52 cards here. We give away half the cards, so there's about 26 cards left. If you'll just tell us.
42. No, go ahead.
You'll just tell us quickly what the odds are of winning today. That'll help us all clear this up.
And the pot is up to $899. So that's a good thing. So here is the winning number, which is one of the last four, 1094. Who has that lucky? Barb did not. Okay, you have it. 1094. Is that you, Duke? Come on up here. You're going to pick a. Now the goal here is to pick the ace of spades out of the. I'm going to hold it down so you can see. Can't see anything, but no, we're not in Vegas, but we're in Dallas, so it's close. Anyway, you're going to pick. If you pick the ace of spades, you get half of that big pot of $899. So Duke, we're praying for you as you do this.
Oh, no, wait a minute. I get the money if I pull an ace of spades.
Ace of spades out of here.
Oh, that. Okay.
You can do it, Duke.
Sure.
Drum roll, please.
I can't get it up.
I'm holding it too tight.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
It's probably a 2.
Okay. It's a 7 of hearts, so I'm sorry. We're sorry that our guest is a loser today. You get to keep this. You get to keep that
as a what?
A memento
okay.
of this experience that you've just had. All right. Okay. With that fun event, we're moving on to our chair of the day, which is Nate Weymouth. Now, Nate was on the front page of the Dallas Morning News being quoted this last week. I noticed an article that had you being interviewed. That was pretty impressive, Nate. How much did you pay for that? Is that? Kidding. Come on up. Talk from up here, then you can tell.
The evolution of that is I was trying, as a precinct chair, trying to get a patrol through East Preston Hollow, and I realized there was a shortage of police. And that's why I stood up for Proposition U, and I will continue to stand up for Proposition U because I think we need more public police officers. Even though the language might be ill-conceived a bit on the proposition, I still think the principle behind it's good. Okay, the principle is good. So, anyway, I want to introduce our guest speaker. As everyone knows, Patrick Henry is my great-grandfather, and I was inspired by the 4th of July parade to bring John here. I can't think of a more perfect example of servant leadership in the story that John's going to tell about my great-grandfather. A little bit about John. John is the previously acting director of the Robert H. Smith International Center for Jefferson Studies in Monticello. He's a fellow at the Virginia Humanities. He has taught law and history at the University of Virginia, George Washington University, Hamilton, Oberlin, and Randolph Colleges. His most recent book, For the People, for the Country, Patrick Henry's Final Political Battle, was released in August of 2023 by the University of Virginia Press. He has also authored several other books entitled Religious Freedom, Jefferson's Legacy, America's Creed, The Wellspring of Liberty, and other works. An award-winning author and frequent contributor, RAGOSTA holds both a PhD, a JD from the University of Virginia. He's also was a former partner of Dewey, he's a lawyer, Dewey Ballantine, and he's also, in his spare time, a beekeeper in Charlottesville, Virginia. Please give a warm welcome for John RAGOSTA.
Thank you all for being here, and I want to tell you a story today that I think more Americans need to know something about. It's a story of hyper-partisanship in the 1790s and Patrick Henry and Thomas Jefferson, and a crisis that almost destroyed the nation. But before I get to that, I want to thank all of you for having me here, of course, and you've been very hospitable. I also, some of you know, and Nate mentioned, my previous work was on religious freedom, and if you study religion and religious freedom, one of the great changes in America over the last 20 or 30 years has been a dramatic decrease in organized religion. And I'm not a minister, I'm not going to be preaching about that, but as that has happened, there has also been a decline in this type of service organization, the Rotary and the JCs and the Optimists and the Garden Clubs. And these types of organizations are so critical to our community. And so I thank all of you for your work with the Rotary as well. But let's get back to that story. And where I want to start is where I discovered this story, because I came across it rather serendipitously. The story starts at Mount Vernon. George Washington was in retirement under his own vine and fig tree, to use one of his favorite biblical allusions. It was January 15th, 1799. It was a mild and sunny day outside at Mount Vernon. But inside at Mount Vernon, it was becoming very stormy. You can almost sense the general pacing the wide pine boards, his anger rising. And finally, the man we know of as the sword of the American Revolution sat down at his desk, picked up a sheaf of paper and a quill pen, and began to write a long letter to the man we know of as the trumpet of the American Revolution, Patrick Henry. Now, they had not communicated for many years, but George Washington writes Patrick Henry, there is a crisis when everything dear and valuable to us is assailed. Washington goes on to rail at some people who are putting their own personal political ambition above country and their political party above country and threatening the Union itself. Washington writes Henry that measures are systematically and pertinaciously pursued which must eventually dissolve the Union or produce coercion. And by coercion, George Washington meant the U.S. Army marching on its own citizens. The nation was at risk. There was the threat of civil war. And George Washington asked Patrick Henry to come out of retirement and run for office. Now, Henry also was in retirement. He'd been retired many years, and he had been offered many positions. He had been offered Supreme Court Justice. He'd been offered Senator. He'd been offered Secretary of State, Ambassador to France, Ambassador to Spain. He had consistently refused all of these offers. He lived at Red Hill, about 175 miles southwest, almost on the North Carolina border. He had previously told Washington that he would only come out of retirement if the nation itself faced the horrors of anarchy. He receives Washington's letter in February of 1799, and Patrick Henry decides to come out of retirement. He writes Washington, "I accord with every sentiment you express to me." So who was it? What's happening? This was a story I hadn't heard anything about. Who is it that's placing their own personal political ambition, their own political party above country and threatening civil war a mere 10 years after the adoption of the U.S. Constitution? It's none other than Thomas Jefferson and James Madison and the radical states' rights agenda of the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. Well, Patrick Henry does come out of retirement. Patrick Henry wins his election. Patrick Henry always wins his elections. But he dies before he can take office. Had Patrick Henry lived, Thomas Jefferson almost certainly would not have been elected president in 1800. Well, this is a fascinating story. This is the sword of the American Revolution and the trumpet of the American Revolution against the pen of the American Revolution and the father of the Constitution. And I had finished my PhD in early American history, but I had never heard anything about this. Country on the verge of civil war? And so I wanted to know more about this. And this was what sent me on the project that eventually became this book. I wanted to know first, why is it that Patrick Henry, who's the intellectual godfather of the states' rights movement as the leading anti-federalist in the country, why is Patrick Henry opposing states' rights? The second thing I wanted to know was, if it's true that Thomas Jefferson would not have been elected president, is there something else we need to know about Jefferson? Maybe have we misunderstood Jefferson? Should we study that a little bit more? And then the third question I had is, why was this not a more important part of history? Why had I never heard about this? Was this simply historical forgetfulness, or is it possible that something else was at work? So that's what I launched into this research project. Now, we need to get to understand this, we need to get to 1798 and the Alien and Sedition Act, but we have to take a half step back. You may recall that when the country starts under the Constitution, George Washington is confirmed as the first president. He takes office in 1789. And almost immediately, the country is launched into a foreign policy crisis because of the French Revolution. The Bastille is stormed in July of 1789. And for almost 25 years, until Napoleon is defeated at Waterloo in 1815, France and England are going to be at war off and on pretty much throughout that entire period. And even though the United States was a new country, they both wanted the United States on their side. They wanted supplies from the United States, naval supplies, food. They were hoping to get the United States to be an ally in the war. And they both tried to convince the United States to support their efforts. Well, George Washington, the new president, realized the country's too new, it's too weak. We can't get involved in these European wars. It'll destroy the country. And so Washington in 1793 issues the Neutrality Proclamation. We're going to stay out of these wars. In 1795, we enter into the Jay Treaty with Britain. It's not a very good treaty. Nobody likes the Jay Treaty, but it kept the peace. We wouldn't go to war against Britain. By 1798, the issue was our relationship with France and a rising Napoleon Bonaparte. We had sent peace negotiators to France as well, but France had insisted on a bribe before they would even meet with our peace negotiators, the so-called XYZ affair. Well, this was an insult. This is an insult to our honor. We're not going to pay a bribe merely to be allowed to meet with the peace negotiator from France. And this was called the XYZ affair, as I mentioned, and it resulted in the quasi-war with France. Now, it's called a quasi-war, and keep in mind, France was our revolutionary ally, but we're now in this quasi-war with France. And they call it a quasi-war, but people were being shot. France seized over 330 U.S. ships in this period. The United States banned trade with our revolutionary ally, France. And all of this sets up 1798. Because in the United States, the Federalists are in control of Congress and in control of the presidency, the party of John Adams, the party of Alexander Hamilton. And they have to decide what to do with the current situation and potential war with Napoleonic France. So they did three things. They increased the military budget. What happens if we get drawn into a war? So we're going to have to strengthen our military. Second thing they did was they adopted the Alien Acts. Because many people, especially in Philadelphia, the capital at that time, there were many aliens, especially French aliens. The third thing they did, and the most portentous, was they adopted the Sedition Act. Now, the Sedition Act literally makes it illegal to criticize the President of the United States or the U.S. Congress. You can go to jail. By the way, say whatever you want about the Vice President. Vice President's Thomas Jefferson. Because remember, this was a time where the person who got the second number of votes becomes the Vice President. Imagine Donald Trump being Joe Biden's Vice President. Kamala Harris being Donald Trump's Vice President. That's the way it was set up. So you can say whatever you want about the Vice President. But if you criticize the President of the United States or the Congress, you can go to jail. Now, historians have told us for many years that there were 14 indictments under the Alien and Sedition Acts, and that there were approximately 12 people who were actually convicted, which sounds bad, but maybe not a national crisis. More recent history has shown they grossly underestimated the impact. There were over 40 indictments under the Sedition Act. Over 120 people were prosecuted, and they were specifically targeting opposition newspapers. Opposition newspaper editors were being thrown in jail for printing material in opposition to the government. Thomas Jefferson refers to it as a reign of witches. He writes to James Madison that if the Democratic Republican newspapers fail, republicanism will be entirely browbeaten. He writes another supporter that to preserve freedom of the press, every spirit should be ready to devote itself to martyrdom. Jefferson was right about this. This was a crisis. It was a reign of witches. You can't run a democracy if you don't have freedom of the press. So, what do you do? What do you do if you're Thomas Jefferson and James Madison and you oppose government policy and you oppose the Alien and Sedition Act, you believe they're a violation of the Constitution? What do you do? Well, the first thing you would normally do is you win the next election, right? You throw the bums out. You change the law. That's the way it's supposed to work, right? But Jefferson and Madison were concerned. First of all, there was that XYZ affair with France, and it wouldn't be the first or the last time where a foreign policy issue had an impact on domestic politics. And John Adams, probably for the first and only time in his entire career, was personally popular. The guy had taken to wearing a sword to events because he was the commander-in-chief. And so you have this XYZ affair, so maybe that's going to influence the election. Then besides that, we have the Sedition Act. How can we win an election if we can't criticize the president and Congress? So maybe that doesn't work. So what do you do if you're Jefferson and Madison? Well, the next thing you would do, you had a lot of lawyers and former lawyers in the room, you sue the buggers, right? It's unconstitutional. You get the law thrown out as unconstitutional. And by the way, this is 5 years before Marbury versus Madison, but they were well aware that the courts had the authority to throw out unconstitutional laws. Jefferson had said so, Madison had said so, Henry had said so, John Marshall had said so. They knew that. The problem, though, was that free speech laws and free press laws were still developing. In England, the only thing that free speech and free press gave you was there could be no prior restraint. But if you published something against the king, once you published it, you could be thrown in jail for sedition. And we hadn't really fully developed our American notions of free speech yet. And to make matters worse, 5 of the 6 sitting Supreme Court justices had been involved in Sedition Act cases and never said anything about its constitutionality. And so if you sue and the Supreme Court says, no, this is constitutional, you're worse off. So what do you do if you're Jefferson and Madison? Well, Jefferson has a third idea. He's going to turn to the states and try to get the states to act against the federal government. Now, this had been tried before. In fact, Patrick Henry had led the effort in Virginia after Hamilton's financial plan had been introduced, which they also thought was unconstitutional. And Henry had convinced the Virginia legislature to file a formal protest with the Congress asking them to repeal Hamilton's financial plan. But Jefferson wanted to do much more than simply file a protest. Jefferson writes the Kentucky Resolutions. Kentucky Resolutions, rather remarkable document. The Kentucky Resolution says that the United States is merely a compact of independent sovereign states, and that each one of those states can unilaterally, if they decide a federal law is unconstitutional, they can unilaterally nullify, that was Jefferson's term, nullify the federal law. The law would be null, void, of no force and effect in that state. Federal law would vary state by state. States would be fighting the federal government. And if the United States was in fact a compact of independent states, succession was a real possibility. And Thomas Jefferson was actively discussing succession in 1799. He writes, one supporter, determined were we to be disappointed in this, repeal of the Alien and Sedition Acts, to sever ourselves from that union we so much valued. In Virginia, a militia officer was quoted in the newspaper saying that if France does invade America, which was the fear, he would take his militia to the French banner rather than to the stars and stripes carried by a political opponent. Open treason. This was the crisis that George Washington was writing Patrick Henry about. State against state, state against the federal government. Newspaper headlines throughout the country, Civil War. And Washington begs Henry to come out of retirement. And it's particularly poignant, it's Henry. You may recall that Patrick Henry was the leading anti-federalist at the time of the ratification of the Constitution. He had opposed ratification of the Constitution. He had said that the Constitution will create a federal government too powerful, too distant from the people. And yet now he comes out of retirement to defend that Constitution. He makes his final political speech on March 4th, 1799 at Charlotte Courthouse. It said when he rose to speak, he seemed ill, he seemed weak, he was bent. It was said he had a Scottish cast, sort of a gray cast to his face. We know he's going to be dead in 3 months. But when he began to speak, the people said a wonderful transformation came over Patrick Henry. He rose up to his full height. His voice boomed out as it had during the Revolution. And Patrick Henry told the gathered thousands, Virginia has planted thorns upon my pillow. Henry has a way with words. Henry says, Virginia has no right to do this, that Virginia is to the federal government as Charlotte County is to Virginia. Virginia has no more right to ignore federal laws than Charlotte County has to ignore the laws of Virginia. Such opposition on the part of Virginia to the acts of the general government must beget their enforcement by military power, civil war, foreign alliances. Henry goes on to tell the people, Virginia will face an army led by George Washington. Who will dare to lift his hand against the father of his country, to point a weapon at the breast of a man who often led them to battle and to victory? Well, it's an 18th century election. People had been drinking. So when Henry, who would dare to lift his hand? There's somebody in the crowd. It's recorded his name, a fellow named John Harvey. He's drunk. I would. This is a mistake. Henry turns on him, rises up. You dare not do it. In such a parricidal attempt, the steel will drop from your nerveless arm. This is a classic Henry. Henry goes on to remind the people that they had elected Congress. It was their Congress. Congress were as much our representatives as the Virginia Assembly and had as good a right to our confidence. If the administration has done wrong, let us all go wrong together. United we stand, divided we fall. Is the federal government too powerful? Have they interfered with your rights? It's necessary to submit to the constitutional exercise of that power. Henry tells the people, you don't like the federal laws, you must object in a constitutional way, Henry's phrase. Go to the ballot box. Go to the ballot box. Henry reminds the people that if you cannot live within the Constitution and the laws of this country, you may bid adieu forever to representative government. You can never exchange the present government, but for a monarchy, there will be civil commotions and intestine wars. Henry reminds the people that he had opposed the Constitution. He reminds the people, I told you this was going to happen. I told you that the government would be too powerful. I told you that the government was going to interfere with our rights. But we agreed. I didn't agree, I voted against it. We, the people, agreed. And if we can't live within the Constitution and the laws that we agreed to, the option's monarchy. Patrick Henry understood the idea of a loyal opposition, what it means to oppose government policy. In a democracy, we're all familiar with the first rule. First rule is the majority rules. The second rule is equally important. The minority must accept the first rule. As I said, Patrick Henry died before he could take office. He dies on June 6th, 1799. Had Patrick Henry lived, it was John Randolph of Roanoke, who was a great Jeffersonian in the early 19th century. He was a leader in the House of Representatives. He was the one who first said, had Patrick Henry lived, Thomas Jefferson would never have been elected president. That, though, then leads to the second question I had. What's going on with Jefferson and Madison here? Is there something that we need to know about Jefferson and Madison that perhaps we've not understood? Because the conventional wisdom is that you get the Alien and Sedition Acts, and then you get the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions talking about compact and nullification, something that Governor Abbott has become very fond of quoting. And then Jefferson's elected president in 1800 as if one follows the other. But this is very misleading. In fact, after the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions were issued, 10 of the 16 states opposed the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, said, you can't do this, this is unconstitutional. No state stood up and supported those resolutions. And even more importantly to Jefferson, in the midterm election, they had midterm elections too. In the midterm election, Jefferson's party, the Democratic Republicans, took a shellacking. In the Deep South, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, the number of Federalist members of Congress went from 4 to 12. In Virginia, the Federalists went from 4 to 8 members of the House of Representatives. And this was because of the threat of disunion. Patrick Henry supports the election of John Marshall, who becomes a Federalist member of Congress. He supports the election of Henry, Light Horse Harry Lee, who becomes a Federalist member of Congress. Both of them become long-term opponents of Thomas Jefferson. In fact, I've often wondered that as Thomas Jefferson battles John Marshall for the next 27 years, whether he often looks back and says, it's Patrick Henry's fault that this son of a gun is in the Supreme Court. Joseph Cabell, if we have any UVA graduates in the audience, Joseph Cabell, who becomes a great ally of Thomas Jefferson in the formation of the University of Virginia in the 18 teens, he writes, it's because the Democratic Republican Kentucky and Virginia resolutions were threatening disunion that people rallied to the Union. But then something else happens. Jefferson and Madison do something that we would like our politicians to do more often, which is they realized their mistake and they changed course. Now, they can't say that. They're good politicians. Of course, they're not going to stand up and say, yeah, we were wrong. We shouldn't have done that. But they realized they had made a mistake. And again, I came across an interesting letter that historians had not really paid much attention to. 8 days after the Virginia resolutions are adopted. Now let's pause for a moment, okay? Kentucky resolutions, compact theory, nullification, federal laws are null, void, of no force and effect, written by Thomas Jefferson. The Virginia resolutions were written by James Madison, and they're much weaker. They're much weaker than the Kentucky resolutions, but they still say that it is a compact of independent states. So the idea of succession is still on the table. 8 days after those resolutions are adopted, that James Madison had written, every word, he writes Thomas Jefferson. It is to be feared that their zeal, he's blaming the Virginia General Assembly for adopting his words, their zeal may forget some consideration which ought to temper their proceedings, the charge of usurpation and the very act of protesting against the usurpations of Congress. The states are usurping constitutional authority. And he tells Jefferson, we've gone too far. Partisanship has gone too far. States' rights have gone too far. And they pull back. And suddenly the Jeffersonians stop talking about states' rights and they start talking about freedom of the press and the size and the power of the federal government. And that becomes the grounds on which Jefferson wins the presidency. And they pull back in other ways as well. In 1798, there had been no prosecutions under the Sedition Act in the South. All of the prosecutions were in the North. And the Democratic Republicans were virtually challenging the federal government, sue somebody in the South, indict somebody in the South and throw them in jail and see what happens. In Virginia, they introduced a law into the General Assembly that would have given state court judges the ability to issue habeas corpus against federal prisoners. Now think about that one for a moment. You have somebody indicted for a federal criminal offense, is thrown in jail by a federal marshal, a state judge sends a state sheriff to get them out of the federal marshal's jail. They have been begging the federal government, prosecute somebody in the South and see what happens. Well, in 1800, there is the first prosecution under the Sedition Act in the South. It's a man named James Callender, and some of you may recognize that name. James Callender in 1803 is the one who's going to publicize Thomas Jefferson's relationship with Sally Hemings. And this may be part of the reason for that. In 1800, he's thrown in jail, and rather than busting him out of jail, they leave him to rot. James Monroe, the new governor of Virginia, writes Jefferson and Madison about Callender's indictment and says, don't do anything stupid. I'm paraphrasing, that's not quite what but Monroe says, let the law operate. Complain about freedom of the press. Don't try to bust this guy out of jail. And they don't, they leave him there. And Jefferson, of course, wins that election, but he wins that election the way Henry had said. You win at the ballot box. You don't come up with some theory about states nullifying federal laws. And then there's Thomas Jefferson as president. You know, when Thomas Jefferson was made president, almost immediately he is accused of hypocrisy. And for 200 years he's been accused of hypocrisy because as president, Thomas Jefferson won't do all of the things he was saying he was going to do in the 1790s. But there's another possible explanation, which is that Jefferson realized they had gone too far. That Jefferson was honestly chastened by the fact that they had almost driven the country to civil war because of the states' rights arguments. And in this regard, I spent some time in the book looking at Thomas Jefferson's first inaugural address. Now that's an address which historians have basically treated for one thing. You may recall Jefferson says, we are all Federalists, we are all Republicans. But historians and political scientists have sort of treated that as almost, yeah, it was easy for Jefferson to say, he won. You know, he's patting the Federalists on the head. Yeah, we're all Federalists, we're all Republicans, now get out of here, I'm in charge. I think that in fact, Jefferson was making a very heartfelt plea and trying to remind people that what unites us is more important than what divides us. Jefferson in that inaugural writes, we must unite in common efforts for the common good. He reminds people that in a democracy the majority rules, but he goes on and writes the minority. He's talking about the Federalists. Remember the hated Federalist, Alexander Hamilton? He says the minority possess their equal rights and to violate them would be oppression. Let us then, fellow citizens, unite with one heart and one mind. Partisanship had gone too far. Jefferson is said to be the first president that recognizes one of the critical things that the President of the United States must do is he must speak for the entire nation. He must unite the nation behind a vision and a principle. And Jefferson seems to understand that he's no longer a partisan, but he's President of the United States. Ironically, with Jefferson's winning the presidency, the crisis disappears. We never know what ifs in history, but had Jefferson lost, and it was a close election, had Jefferson lost, would he and Madison have gone back? And might the Civil War have started 60 years earlier with nullification? Well, I've been talking for a while. I want to get a few questions from you. So when you go to graduate school in history, the classic graduate school question is, so what? So what? Fascinating story. That's interesting. So what? Well, I actually think there's several so whats here that are very important. The first so what is the centrality of free press, and the centrality of freedom of speech in a functioning democracy. Jefferson is correct about that. It is a reign of witches. Anyone who tells you the free press is the enemy of the American people fundamentally misunderstands the American experiment. We must have a free functioning press. Second, so what? Patrick Henry and later Jefferson and Madison were correct. States' rights can go too far. The idea of nullification went too far. And in fact, South Carolina is going to pick up that idea in the 1820s, and it will explode over Fort Sumter in 1861. But the country can't function if each state operates as its own individual republic that can ignore federal laws. Henry's correct about that. Third, so what? And maybe the most important in some respects. Henry is correct about a loyal opposition. If you oppose government policy, what do you do? I don't know about you. The person I vote for doesn't always win in the elections. That's what happens in a democracy, right? And if you can't get beyond that until the next election, you go to the ballot box. You go to the ballot box. Otherwise, the system doesn't work. And I think the fourth so what is that we have done Mr. Henry a great disservice. That Patrick Henry, most Americans have heard of Patrick Henry, but if they know anything about Patrick Henry, it's 7 words. He said in March 1775 at St. John's Courthouse, "Give me liberty or give me death." It's an important speech, but that's really a gross misrepresentation of Henry. He's become a favorite of the Tea Party movement. Clive Bundy and anti-government protesters quote Patrick Henry as if that's all that Patrick Henry had to say. But in fact, Patrick Henry, as he showed in 1799, was not simply interested in individual liberty. That's important. But he was critically interested in the nation and in the community's right to decide, even when they decided against him, because that's the way it works. So with that, I'd be interested in your questions, but that's what the book became about. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. We have opportunity for 1 or 2 questions real quickly. We're kind of running over time, but that's okay. What questions do you have? Yes.
You mentioned the Federalists took power in 1802. The party died before 1812.
The Jeffersonians, I mean, this is actually important because the other piece that I didn't get a chance to talk about today is why have we not heard about this story? When Jefferson's inaugurated in 1801, Jeffersonians basically control the government through 1836. And so the winners get to write the history. And Jefferson, again, I have an article in the Virginia Magazine of History and Biography that just came out. Jefferson does not like Patrick Henry, puts it mildly. He writes James Madison, we have to devoutly pray for his death. So that's one thing that happens, is the Jeffersonians control the government. We are, in many respects, a Jeffersonian nation. Now, what happens to the Federalist? You know, I'm actually planning on writing a little bit about this. One of the things that happens, I'm thinking of Woodrow Wilson, move forward 100 years, And Woodrow Wilson, who was a great Jeffersonian, he was a scholar, he taught at University of Virginia and Princeton, and a great Jeffersonian. And he was criticized when he became president because he had continued Teddy Roosevelt's trust busting. And this was big government. And Wilson says, look, Jefferson would approve of this if he understood our problems in our times. Corporations are so much bigger and much more powerful. I actually did some statistical work. The current largest corporation, even adjusting for inflation, in the 1790s versus today, today's corporations are 140,000 times larger. And so the Federalists may have simply been, in many ways, I said we're a Jeffersonian republic in principle, but our economy is a Hamiltonian economy. And so the Federalists may simply have been ahead of their time to some extent, that they wanted a national government at a time when the national government really didn't need to do much. But, and Woodrow Wilson, that's just one example. Trust busting, you can't do that state by state, you know.
A book is going to be placed in your name and honor at the Jack Lode Senior Elementary School, and that's not much of a payment, but it's going to go a long way for some child and will make a big difference as well. Let's give him a big hand for sharing with us today. Thank you so much. Next week, we'll be hearing about Dallas College, and Elisa Garcia will be the chair of the day. And as we conclude, let's all stand. I'm going to call on Daniel Roby to lead us in the four-way test. But before I get to that, Daniel Roby, who is the executive director of one of our collaborative partners, which is the Austin Street Center, has become a member of our club, and he's going to get his, well, study materials so he can become a full-fledged Blue Badger as soon as possible. I know he'll do a good job. Come on up here, Daniel. Let's give him a hand for becoming a member too, okay? Thank you. Daniel.
All right, the four-way test. Of the things we think, say, or do, first, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build the goodwill and better friendships? Fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you so much. We're dismissed.
Thank you.
Man, I am so glad you got here.
I have the skin in my teeth, you know. I understand. We have one person who's out sick, and I'm trying to cover for them 2 or 3 places. So anyway,
I appreciate you doing it. And, and you know, this is a good group to be in. We have wonderful speakers.
I loved hearing this speaker. I want one of those books.
Yeah. There are books in the back and coupons as well if you don't have the cash to get one today. Where'd you go?
Got some research
well, this is